For the last bit of this afternoon, we thought maybe we'll like to kind of just spend some time with Samra and just like talk about the process of her practice, but also the way that this confluence program has come together, and just the way that we think about research and being together and researching and studying together and what that means and how. And so it's a kind of informal conversation, which we also invite all of you to kind of interject and ask questions at any moments. Yeah. Okay.
Maybe we start. I'll just briefly introduce Samra with a bio, and then we start the conversation. Please feel free at any point to just come closer so we can just. But if you prefer to stay seated, also totally fine. Samra Mayanja is a writer and artist. Her work records and fictionalizes the narratives that the living conjure in order to deal with loss. Mayanja's work is the residue from translations between writing, drawing, film, pedagogy, installation, and performance. Her practice is heavily supported by the instability of these translations and how the limits of each medium give life to the next. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Okay, bro. Thank you. So I wanted to have this like time and space just to reflect on my work within the context of this exhibition and making connections between myself and like Islam's work and Asha's work, but also the kind of the joint curatorial process of QANAT and Alaya at CCA. So I suppose like we're going to kind of do this winding in conversation thing, but yeah, again, feel free to chime in. And the first sort of question that I had was when I was like younger and I thought, yeah, I want to be an artist. It was because I like in my little bedroom in a little kind of post-industrial shitty seaside town in Essex, I was like, oh, one day I'm going to leave this place and I'll be at the CCA in Glasgow. We'll be doing a conversation. We'll be talking about the deep and water and people, like I was just imagining, but I'm kind of situated by the sea, but it's this, these horrible kind of post-industrial towns. I was like, I'll get out soon. And we'll have these amazing conversations about art in various contexts, and it'll be fun, it'll be light, and it'll be heavy, and it'll be all these things. But it doesn't always happen that way as an artist. Sometimes you're in a kind of show and you feel like a little mince meat. You're like, and the work comes out, and you kind of have to take like half the year off just to recover. But I'm like, I know for a fact I'm going to go back to London and like text everybody and like feel nourished and like be tired but like feel good somehow and feel that like, wow, I never imagined the work to be like this and be in conversation like this. And I think that is in part to like the artists that I'm showing within and amongst, including those artists who have contributed, who have done the residencies, but also, also due to the curatorial framework I think that I'm sat within, that's like these lovely people here, and also Sabrina as well, people who are supporting the work. And this is a really long question, but I wanted to ask you guys to maybe speak a bit about how you've arrived here and the way that you're supporting artists and showing work, and how maybe you could talk about how the collaboration came about, just so we can understand where did it start, how did we get here, and how is it like a big hug? Like how how is all of our work getting a big hug? Like, yeah.
I think it really started. Maybe it didn't like this. Not this project, but the conversation started in 2021, COVID-19, 22. Exactly, just before, like 2 weeks before the lockdown. we were organizing a speculative writing workshop in Marrakesh with a writer, his name is Kalam Kapli, he's a sci-fi writer, and me and him were collaborating on this 2-week sci-fi writing design workshop as part of QANAT and the 18 that Alaya joined, and it was within the same, the questions that are recurrent and that connect those works, but that connect all of our conversations. Thinking of the future, thinking of different futures, of different pasts, of all of it, and playing, and making up games. And that. So that's how the conversation started. And then last year, Alaya proposed actually this project, this collaboration between us, building on a conversation that started and stopped for 3 years in that period of COVID. And then we picked up again, and I think at the beginning it was a collaboration between QANAT, le 18, and CCA on the themes of water, of speculation, but as we started speaking a bit more, it also became a conversation about how do we want to do this, like how do we want to work together, and who do we want to invite, and how do we organize it, and who do we want to bring into the conversation. And I think we just got really lucky with the people that we've been collaborating with the past few years that all fed into this project. So it's really it is a confluence of like all of the conversations that came back and, in different forms and different places and happened by chance when we were hiking or like when we were having dinner or, but also creating this space to have those conversations, like this space, formally and informally. So hosted by an institution, but also in the moments outside and between those events. That's my vision. But,
I think to me, confluence is very much representative of a way in which we've been working for quite a long time. Within and through QANAT specifically, but I have to say actually in the way in which le 18 at large works as a space that is extremely open to everything and anything that comes through it and with it, and that primarily enables the existence of those spaces and times for people to come in with research, with passions, and le 18 is actually also a physical home and a physical house, and I think that quality of space creates something that sometimes other spaces don't necessarily allow for. But I think within QANAT what we have been really doing is to opening up spaces for people from within Morocco, Shayma is the first example, she first came as an artist in residence in 2017, edition 1 of QANAT that wasn't meant to last more than those 6 months, and 6 years later we're still here, Islam has been coming 2 times in Morocco, now here, next year inshallah, Egypt, Palestine, whatever. It is organic, quite organic, really not very so much planned in advance or with a strictly clear vision before of trying to do what we're passionate about with and connecting with people that we feel have similar or complementary interests, not only work but also in life.
I think it was very interesting when you were talking about like the feeling of a hug, because I think as curating in the space, I always think about how do you research in an embodied way, and even in processes where I think when we're building the show, when we're trying to measure the height, say for example of your ramp, and you were like, we didn't actually use a measuring tape, but you're like measuring with like, it's just going to go about my knees, or like, and everything was like through, we were measuring things through the body, which is a really interesting way of like doing things, but like, the presence of like being here, of bringing presence into a show that really is not just, I think the research is important, and I also kind of like to make that present through that, but also like how do you bring the embodiment of lived experiences, the embodiment of like being together into a space. And I also always think about this phrase that Miriam Kaba says, that everything worthwhile is done with other people. And how do you do that as well with a kind of process and within an institution, but also in a curatorial practice that makes research present, but also being together and holding space together, like important. And I think he mentioned about home, which the kind of like way that in Marrakesh, like the riads are built, like a courtyard, we sit together and hang out and all of that. And sometimes I think about what does it mean to have a home of multiple occupancy, like the kind of in one space you can hold different ideas, that we can be different without separation. This idea that we can all be different but we not be separated. And so, this idea that's brought up from Fred Moten, and his presence is like here. But this idea that I think home, like for me, it's a very important thing, especially moving away from home, but trying to build one through my practice, but also in a different space. That like I try to build the idea of home even with a curatorial idea, or like bringing people together. That's not just a, like I remember when I met or like had the first chance to think about your work, it was online, but we were talking over a process one time. It was like over a year before I finally kind of thought about inviting you to the show. And I think it's more about the affinities, that you're not just like I don't know, maybe looking online on Instagram and just like, maybe this artist is interesting. That I mean, a lot of people now curate like this, which is also a possibility. But I feel also like it's about just letting the affinities kind of just slowly become something. With the kind of expanse of time, with conversations, with life, with everything, experiences. And so, I think when you talked about home and what the idea of home is, through connections with your dad, with the internet, I really kind of also like chime in with that kind of experience. And every time I look at the art school as well, you know how it's like a lot of scaffolding. I think about this, it keeps reminding me of this idea of support structures. And how do we find a way to kind of like hold each other up and support each other in like our practices and in the way that we are even, so.
I hear you. There's something about like these differing structures, architectural or like this even Asha's structure, providing some sort of framework for how it is that people work. That it could be like a kind of network, but it could be a courtyard, but it could be scaffolding. Like all of those metaphors like somehow facilitate like a working together. Love that. Right, let's go home.
But maybe I would like to pose a question to you. Like, I guess the conditions that you create, even like for your work to exist. I think because you say that your work's actually very solitary. But I feel like the collaborations exist where you call in people like Vanessa Nkante or like Harrison O'Kinney. That you think about it like a choir, like you know actually that when like I don't know, when I think about breathing, that because this whole idea of the show is about a barzakh. And actually, when you think about barzakh, the breathing of in and out is actually a liminal space itself, in itself. And that when we breathe, we're actually also breathing with others, like not only just with us. And so I think that collaboration that you are also calling in your work is with, so maybe talking out a bit more about that.
I mean, there's definitely, going back to Fred. Like a few years ago when I was starting this research around screaming, And Fred Moten has this text called Bridge Plus One on improvisation. It's an amazing text, really. It utilizes the scream of Aunt Hester in Frederick Douglass's autobiography as like, he's using this as like a kind of like this is the sound in and of itself, and how that sound is kind of like repeated throughout various moments in like, I think specifically an African American kind of like musical history. And then he's thinking about Aunt Hester's scream, and he's thinking about the scream of James Brown. And he's using these two screams to try to, to try to illustrate the emotional transference from one person to another across time. So it's like this person's scream that we read in this text is transferred to someone else, as in they're feeling the kind of emotion of that moment, and they take it on and they repeat or regurgitate this through improvisation or through sounding or through talking, and that the emotions are like reconjured or transformed within this person. And I was really quite moved by this text when I read it, because I was like, yeah, this is what people are doing in music. This is like the projects I'd been working on were all about dislocation. Like, how is it that sonically I'm so moved by something that's made like 100 years ago, or like 10 minutes ago, or 100 miles away? Like, how is that? How is that? That's so crazy. Someone's in a room, makes a sound that moves me to the point that like I'm stilled, I'm stuck, or I'm lifted, or I fly. Like, how? How does that happen? And maybe it's something that like we can take for granted because we're engaging with this stuff all the time. But I was just like, wow. So I started thinking about scream, and I've always wanted to sing, but I've kind of had this, my family are the sort of family that do like singing competitions at Christmas, and they'll be like, honey. To a 3-year-old, they'll be like, hon, sit down. And I'll be like, but I can dance. Okay, fine, 2 points, And so I was like, well, I'm not going to sing. And then I kind of decided that, no, I want to sing, and I want to sing with other people. And I think it was the combination of COVID and also like the Black Lives Matter protests all over the world, and people sounding and people talking, and like this thing of like, it felt like there was an undertone of abolition within people's messaging, however large or small, it existed there somehow. And I felt like there was a call to kind of move through like all sorts of forms of carcerality, but doing that together in an environment that was quite risky because it involved talking and breath and shouting. And I was like, okay, let's scream. So I did this project where I was like, let's formulate a choir called Scream that's specifically for Black people to come together in this moment and scream, and I'm going to facilitate this. But it required me learning, like actually having formal training to learn to sing, because I was like, okay, no, I'm over the Christmas X Factor. Like I know it's a skill. Like, and I've learned other skills. I'm going to give this one a go. So the day I was supposed to take my first lesson, it took me ages to find a singing teacher also, because I listened to a lot of music, and I was like, it's got to be someone I listen to that has the quality of sound that, like, okay, are we going to do traditional woodwork? Are we going to do wood carving? What is it that we want to do? I'm making this comparison of sound. I was like, no, I want to be trained by someone who is trained like in a kind of religious like setup, someone whose sounding practice is linked to devotion. And I love Neo, right? And she has this NPR Tiny Desk, and there's one of the backup singers has this gorgeous voice that sounds like kind of billowing, a kind of cavernous, like really wide space. And I was like, it's going to be her. It's going to be her. And I listened to it, but it took me like a year to identify the sound in that audio that I loved. And I was like, no, I know it's coming from her. I found her. Yes. And I was like, hey, Taylor. I've listened to your voice like more times than you. And I really want you to teach me to sing. And she was like, hun, I live in Philadelphia.
No way.
It's COVID. But I trained in the church. So all the things I heard, she confirmed. She was like, I trained in the church. I still sing in the church. And she was like, I also studied how to teach other people to sing. So I was like, yes. Yes. She was like, let's do it over Zoom. We'll do it every week. Set the date, 8th of August. Got to the 8th of August. That was the day my dad died. So I texted her. I said, Taylor, I can't do it because my dad's just died. She was like, no fucking way. She was literally like, no way. How does that happen? The things were connected somehow for me because my dad had COVID. And he was really struggling. All of them were connected. And I got on the train, but I was like, I'm so excited. Even though I was kind of like, at the beginning of this grieving process, I was like, I'm so excited to do these singing lessons because I know this is going to help because I can't talk about it. Like, there's a way in which, you know, death and loss becomes unspeakable. Like, even for those of us who are like, I love to write, I write every day. I couldn't speak, I couldn't write it, I couldn't do anything. And I was like, okay, I've set myself up here. I was like, yes, Samra, well done. We're going to exercise the unspeakable, the non-linguistic layer of this situation. So, I went through the motions, But she got on my case. 2 weeks later, she was like, hun, I know you're going through a really hard time, but you want to do this, so are we going to do it? 2 weeks later, and I started to meet her. And every week, for a year, that first year of grieving the death of my father, I was meeting up with her. And I was also going to vocal improvisation choirs with a singer who was actually performing at Counterflows yesterday, Maggie Nichols. We were part of this huge choir, improvising like every Sunday. So I suppose the reason that this is so much about like the choir and so much about improvisation and I'm wanting to talk about this Fred Moten text and all these things is because it was like, yes, it was the first time where my practice and my life, it was like my practice was genuinely nourishing me as a person because I was communing with people in order to learn, but I was learning how to improvise, which was giving me this skill to like make sounds and like meet other people through the sounds, and the sound itself was like nourishing me. So I was like, this is why I'm doing this thing. This is cool because this is working, right? So I guess somehow, does that really answer the question? I think somehow that all of these things were like connected, Bridge and One and improvisation. And I suppose the reason I mentioned that text and like doing the screen project and then formulating this black improvisation choir and then it leading to all this work is because within that text, I was like going through it and I was like, Fred, you've given us a lot. There's got to be some principles in here that I'm going to like utilize. And one of them was half from Fred Moten and half from the screen choir, because he was talking about a sound that moves through us. And then when I was trying to talk to the choir, there were like 5 of us. There was one guy called Cleve Freckleton, who's a Leeds, incredible singer from Leeds. And he's a friend of one of my dad, Tony, who's an artist in Manchester. And I'd heard him sing, and I was like, Tony, your dad free? Can he hook us up and be in the choir? She was like, you give him a call. I'm not going to ask him. And I did. He said yes. But he was like, no, Samra, he was like, I haven't read the text, but like, that's not it. He was like, and then he wrote it down. He was like, a sound that is of us, that is older than us, that moves through us. That's it. He put it in the middle of the room. He was like, that's the principle. And everyone was like, yeah, that's better. Like that one works. And it really was guiding us through non-linguistic sound. We would just lean into each other and keep it moving. And I would do that with people and I'd do it on my own. So yeah, there's the people who are physically there, but then there's also this other layer, this Cleve's principle, half pinch from Fred Moten, but really it's his own thing. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, I suppose that opens up my work a little bit, but I also wanted to maybe kind of talk about the last part of the question I was asking earlier around the connections or the bits where our works move to and away from each other, and maybe where you guys are opening it up and everyone see those moments where things come and go between the works.
This is not so directly related to this, but it was something that came out a lot, when I was doing the writing that was connected to this work. It's funny that you talk about, I know we're all talking about Fred Moten, because now
he was here, he's still
here. If Fred
here.
Moten hadn't been here, it wouldn't have been. But there's something that I also had read for him, and maybe, I don't know if that text is part of this larger book, but he has the book in the break, and there's one section of the book where he talks about Cicely Taylor and kind of this idea about like that you have words and you're making music, but somehow music takes words somewhere else, and that doesn't mean that, you know, like the words are not enough, but somehow like music, it just has this transcendental sort of thing, and I think that this is really important. I decided to add music to my work, but it was a really last minute thing, and I think it happened partially because also my former work that I had done, the collaging work, always had like a sound element. But somehow when I was making this work, I was trying to think about how can it have a sound, like how can it make a sonic experience without necessarily having to introduce like another sound, or like have to physically introduce sound to the thing. Like can it flow and that gives a sonic experience that makes sense? Can the presence of the work even itself maybe have a sonic experience? And then Shayma suggested, you know, I feel like there's lots of sound associated with the type of work that you're doing, you know, like when you're molding clay or like when you're putting ropes together, and there is a lot of sound in it. And so I thought, okay, I'll try, you know, I'll see what it sounds like. And of course it sounded like me stomping around, stomping around on the floor and like moving stuff around all over the place. But this song that I had been listening to a lot, I just thought to add also, like on top of all of that sound of me just moving around, because it is really important. I think it added that sonic thing. But this idea of music, there's something that you just said, this kind of idea of like, you have these intergenerational experiences and how maybe a sound, it could be the words also too, but also the sound kind of relays that experience and it kind of like lives inside of you. And even a lot of Somali music, I don't understand it. The poetry of it is too deep for me or even my parents to understand. They don't have this type of connection to the poetry. And it's a very poetic culture, and oral literature is kind of, it's everything, you know? Like Somali wasn't written until like 1970, the early 1970s. It wasn't a written language, it was all orated. And so poetry was super important, and the amount of words that you have, I was talking about it even with Shayma, this idea of like how you can find specificity through language, rhyme through language, all of this was kind of like the art of being in the world, like that's your mode of relation to the world. And this song is not a song for anyone, and I think that this was something that was really important. My father told me that when I asked him about a part that I was trying to translate to make sure that I understood what it meant. And he's like, no, it doesn't mean that at all. But also, this is what I think it means, and you can work with it. From what I understood, this is what I believe that it is. Not what's on the internet, but I'll tell you what I think that it means. And I think this idea of kind of like, he has this feeling with the language, you know? And I have a feeling towards it even without fully being in that language, you know? I'm just like kind of like working through it to try to understand it. And that also it's nobody's song. I told him this is a song for X, Y, and Z because she had sung it. Khadra Daher, she died last year. She was a really famous Somali singer. And he was like, yeah, but it's not her song. Actually, this song just belongs to everyone. It's a common, this is common word, you know? And that really touched me. And I just thought of that.
Wow.
Yeah, I remember talking. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Because of this kind of like culture of like repeating poetry or through idiom or through like in conversation, you can't actually trace who that belongs to. You can't center it somehow.
Yeah, and somehow it doesn't matter even. You know what I mean? I think that this is also the thing that it's for everyone, and there's so many, like anyone can sing it, you know, and but it still keeps coming back. Like even like music kind of allows us to think, like be with the past without actually being there, you know. And sometimes you don't even know it. You know, it comes out in an improvised way. That same sound is kind of like reverberating over so much periods of time, and you don't even know, you know, but it's there. You know, it's like it's in there.
Yeah, I was just thinking maybe there's like something within things being revealed around like these like moments within your film and in your research also where like things collapse in order to reveal themselves. They're already existing there underground, but like there's like some sort of crisis or collapse and then they reveal. I don't know, like whether there's what kind of connection maybe you're seeing in Islam or things that you could maybe share with us about that research that we could,
Yeah, I can start also like building with poetry.
Yeah.
Because in many places during my research, for somehow like also working with mythology a lot, where poetry can like engage in a way or another. And the thing is that so I reference a lot one of my favorite writers, and I consider him a philosopher, Hassan al-Barghouthi, a Palestinian writer, and he died finishing or like almost starting this book called Geometry of a Poem, and he was starting like to theorize on thinking of poetry as or how poetry using mythology or myth would make like geometrical structures and this connection to the mental image, and this was also like something that I work with a lot, especially in my thesis in the master's. So yeah, like and then these structures, when they collapse and people discover that the earth is hollow like inside, and then like they go and they get completely lost, and this is like the what she's called the Bride of Alexandria, because she was newly married or about to get married, and then fell in the cistern, and then they couldn't find her, and then like myth starts to like collect and people like of course like exaggerate or like while carrying the story they add stuff until I figured out that one of the slang Egyptian sayings that says al-ard shaqatu bala'atu, which means that the earth broke and swallowed this person, and this means that we can't find this person anymore. But it's still very poetic because it becomes a legend or a myth, and then it builds on each other. And then Hassan al-Barghouthi says that when you use a myth and then you like poetically use it for something else, then you are adding to it like as mathematically adding like to the power of a numerical value. And he also mentioned something about sound in poetry, or how you recite poetry is also kind of geometrical arrangement in a space, like when you talk or when you sing or when you say something. And this is why I like this opening that happened in the ground. I couldn't find anything to do with this myth except a sound. Like there is a sound, and then there's this lady who's still alive in the future, and it's just like reciting this very melancholic like sound or singing, and this is how I pulled the stuff together. And then when I went to Morocco to find a similar system that was also underground, people fell like into it or keep falling into it. I thought also what sound also I can use, or what kind of poetics that I can figure out. And in the performance there was like this women singing as well, like a very traditional song that comes from a different myth, but I also used it as a kind of like, yeah, this is like the call for the rain. It's a kind of like a part of a rain ritual. So yeah, like so at some point I was thinking like, yeah, this break that happens in the ground, the sinkholes that are very violent, but at the same time, like treating it poetically might show this violence in a different way, which is the non-human view, or this whatever lives in underground. And this is how I built the story on this.
Wow.
Yeah, I hope it made sense. To the question.
Yeah.
I think maybe we'd like to open it up if anyone likes to ask any questions or respond to,
Do you now sing at Christmas and you win?
No, I don't. I just show off on them. Like I just sing all the time. Just, oh, Samra, you're really good now. I know.
There was something that reminded me when you were talking about in the little room and like deciding how high you want things. When my grandma cooks, or like when she does anything, she just says do it ahra, and it just means do it by feeling.
Yeah.
You can't measure it, just feeling.
Yeah. Because I find that quite you know, especially when you're, it's like, I don't know, it felt to me the first time I was like showing work in a gallery, I was extremely, extremely nervous and so, in a way, so shy. And then I realised that like, oh God, no one tells you that, you know, there's a layer of it that's like communicating decisions that you like would make extremely quickly on your own, but as soon as someone asks you, you're like, no, that's not the one. You know, you start to doubt yourself instantly. And then I kind of like developed that thing of like using the body, because it's like, well, there's no argument here. It's like how tall, my shoulders, how high, my knees. Like, you know, like it doesn't complicate things. And then, yeah, just makes things so much easier. Otherwise, that first experience of showing in a gallery, I would just I was like, oh my God, I don't know, anything. Like I was, in a way, so I didn't have a way of doing it. And there were questions that I hadn't anticipated, or like even just the amount of care, you know, that technicians will give to how high, is it here, is it to the left? And it's like, on the wall, just put it on the wall. And now it's like, okay, no, not my height here, to my chin, and it just helps like me not freak out and regulate things a little bit, you know, somehow, you know? You need a kind of, we were talking about that as well, there's like another layer of being an artist, it's like this technical communication and like having the confidence to just be like, it's good, Samra, this is what you actually want, you know?
Exactly. I think it's that thing of like, I have very, very similar reactions where people ask me, does it look good? I'm like, yeah. I'm just like, it looks good. But I think it's because I leave a lot of, it's very rare that there's something that I feel it has to be so specific. And I feel partially because if you come in so specific for me, I feel like I start to kind of, you know, like it makes a difficult experience for you. Like, oh, this doesn't look right, or this isn't working, or, you know? So to kind of make work that's a little bit more, like this is why I really enjoy making this work compared to other things that I've done. It's like this, it's so flowy, like it's so organic that it could look 100 different ways, and that's it. You know what I mean? It's right. It's right. And the technician, like you guys will see this, I'm so proud of this thing. Like I feel like I have to put Stephen's name on the wall, like next to the work. We're trying to make this, I don't even know what we were trying to make it look like. We just had a general shape that we were going for. And he made these beautiful like enclaves with a shovel. This was not, you know, just like beautiful enclaves all around the sand. That it now looks like a landscape. You know, that was not the concept, but he did that. And he's like, does it look good? I was like, it looks amazing. And everybody came around and they're like, what's that? And I was like, I know. Like, it's amazing. And I think that's such a beautiful part of working. You know, this, maybe just to go back a little bit to what Alaya was saying about it, when you're working with so many people and it's stressful because people are coming to you to communicate things. And I'm like, let's just do it together. You know, you think it looks good? I think it looks good.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah,
you know
it looks
what
good.
I mean? And it's really nice to do this. Like all these different people introduce something that I didn't even think of, and then that's it. And it wouldn't have been that way. You know, it might be something else really beautiful in another place, but this would never look like this without the whole thing, everything that happened this week, which I love. Yeah.
But also to share to actually be present and feel your body in the space. I think we invited Samra to actually really be here 1 month prior to building the show. So it's about just like, just be comfortable, feel the space, know like CCA, and just like, before actually, And that was, I think, a kind of way that we really try to bring artists in a really slow, if possible, manner to inhabit like a space before
We
Yeah.
didn't want Islam and Asha to feel that comfortable. So
Yeah, so we only like later.
I'm
Yes.
like very much in the building. Yeah. Yeah, it's, I mean, and that's also quite like that's another way of combating the I don't even, the exhibition making side of being an artist. That's the bit that I find actually very difficult. Is like, one, use your body as measurements if I was writing a rule book, and two is like be there for a month before. I think most shows I've had, I just get there like a month before, if I can find a way. And then it means like I've made lots of friends and stayed with people, but also you know the space enough and you know the people that this level of trust starts to build. Because I feel that's another added like element. Like, you're working with people, it's a working relationship somehow, but there is also a kind of element of trust. I've told you I'm going to make a film. So I've got to make that film, right? But it is this kind of relationship, and a lot, I think, of relationships within our society where there is trust required is somehow mediated through another party. But this one we have to I've got to make the film. That's it. I have to somehow but the trust isn't automatically always there, and it's the things that Shayma was speaking about of like the informal and formal conversations that strengthen that, and the long lead-in time, and like being here and meeting all the technicians and meeting people before, that means that when I suppose one arrives, that you don't feel, like maybe silly, or you don't feel that your work is somehow inadequate, or you don't feel those kind of I still feel them, they're there, but I trust somehow that I'm going to be cared for. Like, even within the residency, I wrote this text, Accidental Aquanaut, that was like trying to really expand on this poetic of the deep, and I was like, Alaya, Sabrina, I've never done this before, but I'm going to share the text before I've made any edits. So it was like 20 pages. I was like, guys, if it's offensive, if it's rude, if it's this, if it's that, just a free write, but I typed it up. And we went through it for 4 hours here on this floor. And again, those things are essential in a way to making, to me, and maybe not all artists, to me it's essential to make the work, to have that trust, and for curators to be able to do their job of really reading and interpreting. But that can't always happen when you don't feel like your work is going to be dismissed or misunderstood or not given time or not given those what's the word that I'm looking for? Some kind of grounding in its interpretation that doesn't mean that you feel somehow sidelined within the making of the work, or that it doesn't have to be finished, or it doesn't have to be perfect in order for people to see it. That you allow people into the process early on, when things are still quite wide and things are, wrong and accidental, and all those things that your brain does quickly without editing itself, are allowed a bit more space. In a way, that was I was saying to Sabrina and Alaya after the fact, I was like, this has actually changed my writing practice, because I would never have shared that in the past. I would edit down the 20 pages to 3, literally 3, and then I would give it to someone to read. Yes. Right? So I really did learn something, but again, it all comes back to that kind of framework, and not taking that thing of trust for granted somehow. Yeah.
How did you concretely work this out? Did you meet a lot, or you were here for 1 month, everyone was living in Glasgow, or how did you really make it the process?
No, we're not here in Glasgow, but we talked online. Yeah, but like someone was just saying, it wasn't the sort of thing where it's a weekly check-in or anything like that. There was enough space and time to get into the work and then talk about it, and then we'll take some more space and time, and we'll come back and I'll talk about it. And I feel like it was a very generous process, the whole thing. For me, I feel like it gave me a lot of space for myself to do the work. And I think that I would have loved to be in Glasgow, but also at the same time, I think being able to have the opportunity to make this work in a place that I work, and I know the materials, and I know where to go, and I know how to do the work and have support around me. I think if I had come here, I would have been just exhausted. Like I think it would have been really difficult to do the whole process here, like kind of far away. But I would have loved to be here at least a month before, so I could spend at least a month with Samra. Like without me and with everybody else. It just feels like like a roller coaster 1 week. I think we all feel like we need another week. Just to be here. But yeah, I think being able to do that was really nice, like to have the space and to do it from my own home. Like I worked in my own home, but I also had the resources to work in my own home. You know, for someone to give you that space and those resources and be like, you can do this, do it how you like. Yeah.
But also all our relationships extends beyond the formal invitation to the show, in the sense that, for instance, Shayma and Asha know each other very well since a few years. So Shayma sort of introduced us to Asha, Islam and I since at least 2 years. So there is this, we have maybe not all of us together, but in couples, and then bringing it to the broader circle, build this trust and relationship and getting to know each other and each other's work and each other worlds. Much earlier than the actual moment in which we said, hey, what do you think about coming to Glasgow?
But I think it's really interesting to hear you speak about work and the process, and both kind of specific to this, but more widely, and where your influence has been at, but also just where your lives have been at. Because I think in spending a bit of time in the gallery today, I've had such a sense of like spaciousness, and this real image all day of like like sediment, and like you get a jar that's got like soil and whatever, and you shake it up. It's all murky and it settles. This is what I've had playing over and over in my mind, and this idea that this exhibition and this work and this process that you've been in is like that kind of business and now everything settled, and this is this moment that we're in, of like this settled moment, but it's not like more kind of this is what I am saying, rather than like this is what I'm trying to say. It's like this is what I've ended up saying. I could have maybe told you. Yes. I think I just really am refreshed by that, and I enjoy that, and I enjoy that these walls are not fucking white. Very active in this space.
Wow.
A question that kind of leads perfectly on from there in a way about the making and the building of the exhibition space. This feels like a residency space in a way, and I wondered maybe individually but also collectively about this year-long program, because it feels like we're part of your residency with this open space to also be introduced, but in our own time, in a very trusting space. And I wondered if even this space alone, right from the beginning, was always an intentional space to provide that or offer that to people that were just meeting you all and also meeting your work, because it feels so perfectly like, this is wonderful.
Now I want to say it's intentional.
Just decided it today.
No, I mean, we had the idea of... But, I mean, the word is like, the term we chose is actually not, like, the resource room. It sounds like much less appealing than, a cozy space, I guess. But,
like, we didn't know what to call it. I think maybe it became easier when Alaya suggested the title, like All Islands Connect Underwater. I think it gave maybe more, like, it gave us, it just became easier to imagine a space. just to think of them as islands and to think of the words, the works as islands. I think it
And
made
maybe
it
also
easier.
since the Marrakesh residency was just in January, February, so relatively. So I think maybe also the choosing the carpet, sitting down low, that's very much part of the way in which
Yeah, it's also exactly. It is a little bit a replication of the 18. not maybe like in a nicer way. But like because in the 18, like it's a very very intimate space and it's very friendly. It's a home. It's really it is a home. But I think originally, but also became this amazing, like warm space for anyone who came through. So yeah, and I think the way all of those conversations, like this one, and the screenings and everything is just so friendly. And most of the time we do the conversations or watch, like we're on the floor and we're sitting next to each other, and the space is maybe like a quarter of this room, but it hosts so many people. And I think this was, we were imagining, like it's nice to have carpets, it's nice to sit on the floor, it's nice to have things that are in front of you and you take them, to have books around and leaflets, to have tea and cats. I don't, like just things, just being.
And gin.
And gin. Yeah, I think that was what we wanted, like this feeling of just.
We're missing jungle.
Ease.
Yeah. And I think we were thinking about really this idea of the archaeological kind of like way of inviting people to dig in. That you come in and you are the archaeologist. It's almost like what your work is, trying to find the future and the past. But so wanting to build that idea of like, that. But the idea of the carpet is whenever you take a carpet out, wherever outer space, or that becomes like a site of our home.
But also, I think the colors, it was a lot from the works. We were thinking, we were really debating about the colors. Definitely not white. We knew that, but we didn't know which colors to choose. And this happened because of Asha's work.
I didn't know that.
We were looking at the photos that Asha took of her work in Jordan, and then we thought it worked because we had a lot of different ideas of how to create the space. And again, it was just like Samra knew exactly what she wanted in that room, so that was also easy. I think that's how we created the space. It was drawing a lot from the works and the conversations and the exhibition before.
So the combination of colours also feels quite like Marrakech, like this is the kind of
but
colour scheme that I've been thinking about.
because one of the very first idea was to sort of create this sense of being underwater or in an underwater. So we thought of dark blue or blue walls, and maybe even trying to cover this and make it like really being in the deep sea. But then when we saw Asha's work and also in relationship, for instance, to Islam's work, it's like we're not really necessarily speaking from the deep bottom of the sea anymore. No, so that makes more sense to sort of resituate it also in the landscapes where the research and works come from, or in relation to this.
I'm aware we're also almost 6, so I'd like to maybe kind of thank all of you for really like spending time in the space in this afternoon, and also all the generous kind of contributions and really being present here. And maybe we can hang out after this over like some drinks or like water. Favorite water.
I thought you were going to suggest we sing. I thought this was the moment.
Oh yes, okay, shall we? Yes. Okay, let's do it. Okay.
Oh really? Okay. What kind of vibe do we want? Should we just go full on improv?
Yes. Yes.
Full improv.
Yes. Let's do it.
Should I just begin?
Yeah.
Yes.
come in when you want.